Hello, hello. I am here with the esteemed, my old school colleague, Dr. Kurt Youngberg. And I'm very grateful to have you on the podcast, to be able to talk to you. And Kurt, I'm just excited to get an in-depth overview of where you've been in your life personally and then professionally. I know as you and I have talked, the last few years have been very busy for me in different ways, but I feel like in many ways we run parallel.
Hmm.
And you've had a tremendous amount of growth. And so I'm going to give the audience a quick intro. I met Dr. Youngberg back when we were both in the PhD program at the University of West Georgia. But we had some unique synchronicities
Hmm.
where at one point we started to talk. I think you came in the cohort a year after me, or maybe 2 years
I
after
think,
me.
yeah, a year or two. I'm not quite certain on
I think
that
it
one.
was two. I'm
Yeah.
embarrassed to say two because you guys, Kurt came into the PhD program, finished all of his coursework, completed his dissertation, and graduated. Started 2 years later and graduated 2 years earlier. So you like completely just blew by me. And my excuse for a long time was, well, I'm the only one in my cohort that, is working full time and has kids. And then
Hmm.
Kurt came in and he was like, yeah, I got kids too. Yeah, I'm working full time too. But I remember the most beautiful thing was I started to talk about my past work with counseling, psychotherapy, mentoring, and I mentioned the company Vive
Hmm.
support program. Shout out to Dave Hers, Willow Rubin, and come to find out, you had worked for Vive in Utah for a
Yep.
while. We had that connection, and but I'm very grateful for you to be here. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, bring us up to speed. Talk to me about completing the PhD and then your private practice and now your work with Apraxis, and
Hmm.
go from there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Wes. I mean, first off, it's an honor, man, to be here, and such a privilege just to have this opportunity. And Yeah, I mean, this is a long, windy road, right? I'm kind of wondering where to kind of drop in to talk about, just the transition, uh, into the PhD program, becoming a doctor, starting a practice. I mean, so many different transition points. I think the place maybe I'd like to stop and kind of drop into is ultimately what kind of led me to come to Georgia in the first place. So I had been, as Wes had mentioned, I'd been in Utah and was had a private practice there. I was doing some school-based counseling and just feeling unsettled. Like I knew there was something more in my life that I needed, and I'd always wanted to go back to school and to do a PhD. And to kind of maybe back up a little bit, so I'm by license, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I had been doing clinical work for the better part of, I guess at that point, almost 10 years, maybe 8 to 10 years. It had a diverse kind of background working in wilderness therapy, therapeutic boarding schools, which are basically RTCs, residential treatment centers, private practice settings, school-based settings. So kind of just a plethora and diversity of different clinical experience. And in all that, though, I've always just kind of felt this urge that I wanted to go back to school and get a PhD. It was a season of life where there's just like this real intense kind of energy of like, I'm just craving knowledge, I'm craving wisdom, and wanting to challenge myself, really wanting to kind of take a deep dive into kind of exploring different topics of interest for myself. And so I was kind of in this place of like, I think I should do a PhD. I don't know how to do, where to start with all that because there's so many different options and so many different trajectories. And I knew I didn't want to do a clinical track, like a PhD in clinical psychology, because I'm already a clinician. I didn't want to go back and do all that. And so I just started looking up different PhD programs. And at the same time, I remember listening to this podcast. I think it was a psychology podcast. I can't recall the name of it at the moment, but I remember listening to a host the host interview a guest, a professor at the University of West Georgia named Tobin Hart. And this professor was talking about his research and interest in spirituality and with children. And there was something in what this man was saying that just opened up my heart and just was like resonating tremendously. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is wonderful research. I love what this guy's doing. Lo and behold, the next week, when I'm looking at the University of West Georgia again to kind of go back and think about applying, I'm looking at the faculty and I'm like, holy shit, there's Tobin Hart, right? And it was just like this confirmation of like, this was like a synchronicity for me, you know, of like, this is where you need to be, you know, this kind of community, these people who, you know, this fringe kind of, community of psychologists who are looking at humanistic, transpersonal, and critical psychology. And it was like this is it. And that was the only place I applied to. And I threw it in and got accepted and told the family, and with permission, obviously, from the wife, like, hey,
Hey guys,
we're
guess
moving.
where we're going. They're like, what?
Freaking Georgia, right? Like, holy crap, why Georgia?
Now walk me through what, and Ashley's your wife. What did you, was she supportive? Like,
Oh, Ashley, 100% supportive. I mean, she knew that this was super important to me. She knew I had just this hunger for this, and knew I needed to kind of take this risk, right? The sacrifice. And she's my roll dog. She's been behind me through and through with all my crazy ideas and everything I'm trying to do, and is just so supportive. And so much love, and big shout out to Ashton. Thank you so much, babe. Like, it's incredible that you helped bring this to fruition. At that point,
how old were the kids at the time?
Yeah, I was going to say, so we had just had our third daughter. So at that point, we were looking at probably an 8-year-old, a 4-year-old, and just a barely 1-year-old, not even 1 year old at that time.
And you have 2 boys and 1 daughter.
2 boys, 1 daughter. Yeah. Yeah. So
that's a lot. I mean, that's a big
lot
move to uproot your family from this home, wherever it has been, and take this journey. But Ashley could see your calling, knew it was this synchronistic alignment, and you were like, I'm being pulled to go do this work. I'm this wisdom seeker. I want to do higher education. I want to get my doctoral degree, but something is pulling me to this program.
Yep, 100%. You said it right there. So she's all on board, ready to take on this crazy adventure, pack up sell our house, pack up the house, move cross country. We did actually had some family here in Cumming. So her sister had just moved from Florida up there. So there was some connection point. But otherwise, it was like, we don't know shit. We don't know anyone, right? And we just settled in Marietta. And as I started the program, right before I met you, I had opened up my private practice here in Marietta, and started to kind of just slowly build up clients while I was starting the PhD program. So it was just an intense transition, man. Like, moving from Salt Lake to the South out here in Georgia was also kind of a big kind of cultural kind of upheaval, and trying to figure out like just how I connected with the area, the environment, the land. Like, that was in its own challenge for sure. But yeah, I would say overall, and I'll kind of come back to this, like, we've traveled around a little bit and moved different places, since the time that we've been married and that we've been had a family. And Georgia was one of the most welcoming and accommodating places we'd ever kind of experienced. And really the ground was so fertile to really like set roots, and we've just been so thrilled and just felt so much love from the community. So it's been a great transition in that way.
That's awesome. And Tobin. Shout out to Dr. Tobin Hart, and you were referring to his work, Secret Spiritual World or Life of Children.
Life of Children. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then he went on. Had he written the other text, the four
virtues?
Yeah. Had he
four
written
virtues? Yeah. he had just written that. And yeah, I actually used some of that in my dissertation, just as a wonderful kind of expose of the different kind of virtues that have been kind of historical, cross-cultural, and just really trying to how to kind of bring those in, into our life more fully, into our clinical practice more fully.
Yeah.
So Tobin actually went on to be my my dissertation chair. And so again, that kind of synchronicity was just really confirmed for me of moving here, and my relationship with him, the mentorship, was just, I mean, so foundational for me out here. I mean, Tobin did a phenomenal job at like striking the balance of being a professor, a mentor, and just someone like that I could just like I guess turn to in times of struggle, right? I mean, there were many times where, our meetings for the dissertation would really just be about like him just allowing a space for me just to be, and just to process, converse, like, and we had the joke, this isn't therapy. Right? He always wanted to make sure, Tobin always wanted to make sure this isn't therapy, but yet it was therapeutic for me. And like,
absolutely.
a big part of why I know I was able to do what I was able to do in the time frame to finish my research and to finish my dissertation was because of that relationship, because he created the space for me just to kind of like to be creative with my ideas, to struggle, to put my struggles and my worries, and I had that place at West Georgia, and I had that relationship, and that was that was vital for me, and it helped me kind of narrow down everything, and kind of zero in on what I really wanted to explore in my research, and we made it happen. And I had set the goal when I came to Georgia. I set the goal. I wanted to be finished in 4 years, right? I was dedicated. I was like, this is a huge sacrifice my wife, my family's made. I owe it to them to do this, right? To buckle down and hammer my stuff out and get it done in 4 years. And
You hear that, Allison? I said the same thing, but I said within 8 years. And I said, and I'm going to drag it out just a little bit to let the whole family remember how much dad has sacrificed. But no, you were extremely driven. I mean,
laser focused.
Oh man, persistent, committed, laser focused, and it was beautiful to watch. And you were always extremely supportive of me. So even as you rounded out and completed, I was building the center, you came through and toured, we kind of talked, but you were always incredibly supportive of me kind of rounding out my work too, because it's an arduous and rigorous process. But like you said, your soul was being called to it. And when we look at those fringe explorations, UWG is so unique because it really is integrating humanistic and critical and transpersonal, a focus on consciousness and society, very opposite of myopic programs in PhD clinical and counseling psychology, that you'll look at some of the professors, and at least how I felt is I'd go, I don't have any interest in any of this, in some of the research and where they were focusing, because it was much more quantitative and statistical based and just very, very small and nuanced. And it wasn't touching upon a larger tapestry or web of connectivity, which is how I always saw clients, psychology, counseling, therapeutic healing. It was much larger than the individual, and it was connected to all these other things. And so UWG saw that, and you felt what I felt, where there's these prominent psychologists and professionals that understand the web and tapestry of interconnectivity. And I like to use the word transcontextuality. That's one of Bateson's words, where it's like it's even more than multidisciplinary. It's recognizing the connective tissue that holds everything together that we often try and separate and compartmentalize.
Yeah, that's beautifully well put, man. I mean, I've actually only heard that term. What is it? Transcontextuality. I've only heard that through you and sharing that. And who'd you say? Where was that from?
So it's Nora Bateson, who
Laura
is
Basin.
Gregory Bateson's daughter.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Kurt, I didn't even get to tell you this. I'm headed to London the last week of July to do her warm data training in person.
What?
And I'm very excited to go study with Nora Bateson and
That's phenomenal, man.
certified. And dude, Herbie
Yeah.
Hancock's playing that Friday night. So I'm going to go to
Oh,
Hancock and I'm going to go to a jazz show. But I want to dive in. I don't want to, at some point, I really want to understand and have you talk about ecopsychology, your work, because I think there's so many parallels of what you are trying to focus on, which is
hmm,
that relationship to not just geographical location, but land, climate, nature, and what that does to the human psyche and how we're a part of that.
yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway, so
Yeah.
I'll make us
Oh
go.
well, yeah, we're gonna dive into that right here because that kind of brings us right. We're kind of that point of like the dissertation work and stuff, and then also kind of what I'm doing here at Praxis, and it's really just the kind of the culmination of this historical, personal, professional journey that I've come on. That's just kind of this the confluence of all these things coming together, and so but I don't want to get into too much of the detail of like some of the experiences of what helped bring me more in line with a kind of nature-based and cross-cultural kind of lens to examine our psyche and our psychologies. But um, my I'll just kind of say that my dissertation was one where again I'm here I am all about a challenge, right? And I'm coming out here to really grow and to develop and I like yourself said, like I hate the quantitative analysis of things, and I knew I'd come into this program wanting to do some type of qualitative analysis for my research, but I actually ended up doing some qualitative analysis pre-dissertation, looking at uh, gap year students and their cross-cultural immersion in Costa Rica, and how they kind of had this self-reflexivity of looking at this kind of immersion into a different culture, into a new landscape, how this kind of assimilated and integrated into like a new worldview of themselves and how they were able to kind of see themselves in a different way. Really beautiful, right? That there's just evidence of so much growth potential in what we call these ecological transitions, right? That we're transitioning from one environment of an ecology of relationships into a new environment, a new ecology, and in that rupture there's new roles, there's new ways in which we identify well with others, with the world, with ourselves, and that kind of creates this opportunity to see things anew. And so I was kind of mapping this qualitative analysis. I ended up publishing that pre-dissertation, but that was a big part of what informed my dissertation. It was looking at trying to take a holistic view of development of emerging adults and trying to kind of create a supportive framework to help encourage a more what I call an eco-integrative model of care.
Beautiful.
And so I ended up doing the challenge here. I actually didn't do a qualitative analysis for my dissertation. I just went full on, just a little bit of masochism in here of like little pain for myself. Like I'm going to do the theoretical thing. I'm going to just write a theoretical dissertation, meaning that for those that aren't aware, I'm not doing a research project like the typical research where I'm looking at participants and trying to understand participants' experiences. I'm like doing research deep into different theories and trying to weave these theories together to kind of create my own theory in a way. And so that's what the eco-integrative model is and kind of derived from that dissertation.
Kurt, it's beautiful. You know the visual I got, man.
What's
As you're
that?
well, you're talking and you're using. I remember. So I'm gonna put this on Eternal Strength, our podcast. But then I'm a co-host for WRFG, and
Yeah.
they're a radio station, really beautiful community-based radio station in Atlanta. and Mark is the lead guy. And I did one where I talked all about my dissertation stuff, and he was like, Wes, this is pretty heady. We do stuff on the mind and consciousness and everything, but you may need to break it down a little bit more. Anyways, as you're talking about this like nature-based, cross-cultural, and how it changes our psyche, and I love eco-integrative model. But you remember Finding Nemo?
Yeah.
I got the visual as you were talking of Nemo when he gets sucked up because he's in a fish tank in an ecological environment in a dentist office.
Mm-hmm.
That tube portal transports him, bam, and spits him in the ocean. And I can't remember all of Finding Nemo, but like the adventure begins.
Yeah.
He meets the surfer turtles that are like, "What's up, dude?" And then he goes through the hero's journey in many ways, Jungian, archetypal, but
For
to
sure.
your point, the ecology changed. An entirely different ecological environment happened and shifted the essence of who he is, how he sees the world, lived experience. And so that was the visual that was playing in my mind is if ecological, and it's not just a shift in nature, but to use Gregory Bateson's work, it's an ecology of mind. So wherever you are and your perceptual lens can start to really integrate into your ecology of how you think and cognition and emotions.
Yeah.
These things make up we're tethered to.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful, right? The ecology of mind. And the thing that's coming up for me is, like this traditional notion of like what we think we know of the psyche, right? The psyche as, and again, there's so many different interpretations I've come across of like what psyche is, and this root for psychology. And on one hand, it looks at like the mind, as the mind as like the kind of cognitive, the rational processes, like in psychology in the more modern terms has really tried to understand mind as kind of a neurological kind of process of just thinking and experiencing. But psyche also has more connection also into like, into like spirit, in terms of like how the Greeks used to see this as a spirit. It's kind of it's something that animates, right? And in that way, it was also breath. It was about like this process of like of energy in and energy out, and the psyche was associated to that. It was mind was also spirit, and also breath, and it was like this very active process. So when I hear an ecology of mind, I think also about one of the goals of ecopsychology, which just for those that aren't aware, ecopsychology is a kind of subsection of psychology where they're studying our ecology and how our ecology affects our psychology, right? It's really the human nature connection. And what really ecopsychology's goal here is to say, like, we need to examine and evaluate our relationship to nature, because the current modern crisis is one where we're absolutely disconnected from nature, and where there's some pretty cataclysmic kind of experience consequences because of this. And so ecopsychology is about recognizing the suffering that we're in modernity as a result of this disconnection from our natural environment. And it's about building bridges to our natural environment and to establish a better relationship with nature. And again, this idea of mind, right? Psyche. I think it was Andy Fisher, one of the kind of foremost thinkers in ecopsychology, talked about one of the goals of ecopsychology is taking this idea of psyche as like this thing that we only kind of see as this thing that exists within the human being, rather, again, whether it's in the brain or the body, however we want to see that. It's about actually taking psyche and flipping it and putting it outside, into our environment, into nature, and seeing that psyche is the spirit that imbues everything around us. It is minded, so there's consciousness, in our environment. There's consciousness in nature. There's consciousness in inanimate and animate objects, all the way from trees to rocks to stars, down to the cellular level, that there's a form of kind of consciousness in there. And that once we can kind of re-examine psyche and, kind of change this worldview of psyche that's embedded into everything, the cosmos, our relationships, then that will be like the basis for developing these more compassionate, loving, empathic kind of relationships with our natural environment, and ultimately with others too.
Beautifully.
So it's a synthesis of psyche here, psyche there, psyche in between. I see it's like an action, it's like an active process.
Yeah, like you said, and the breath is the most beautiful example, where it is ever moving, ever flowing, ever present, but it's in process.
Hmm.
And when you really look at it, it's fighting against the archaic and narrow-minded narrative that anything is ever separate, including ourselves.
Yes.
But shit, man, the ego and Western mind can really, really push that idea of individuality in, separateness, to the point that you can forget. You really can consume yourself to a point where you think, I am separate and I am disconnected and I am alone and I'm solo. And that can bring, like you said, cataclysmic, negative types of energy in every facet, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. So when you look at a lot of the psycho-spiritual healers and holistic growth oriented clinicians, they'll say the first thing to do is recognize you're not alone, you're not separate, in whatever you may be enduring. But I think as human beings, and especially individual psychology, will always point to the individual. You have anxiety, depression, this particular pathology, and we're not taking into account, let's look at the psyche. And if we see the psyche is not an individual internal idiosyncratic psyche, the psyche is collective. Where is the we? What is this person's connectivity or relationship to their ecology, their family system, their support arena, their life, and how they see it and are in praxis with it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, man. And thank you for bringing that attention to that. And that's a huge part of what we're trying to achieve here at Apraxis, right? And it's funny that you mentioned that word praxis. I don't know if that was intentional there.
Praxis. No.
Yeah, I don't know if that was intentional, but that speaks to the essence of Apraxis is, and just so that I get this question all the time, so Apraxis Center is the therapeutic center that I created. It's going on, this is the second year. So really kind of first year, in its infancy. And it's, people always ask, what is I guess I want to start here. What does Apraxis mean? Right? Because it's a word you don't really come across. And so I love how you're segueing here was you mentioned Apraxis. And so what I hear you saying, those is two different words. It's a praxis. And that's how I see Apraxis, is these two words kind of coming together. But praxis means, and you know this, but from my understanding to where it comes from is from liberation psychology, right? Where it's I think coined, at least in this term, by Paulo Freire, who talks about praxis kind of being a kind of an action and a critical self-reflection coming together in a community setting, people coming together for the purpose of transforming their environment, for changing the environment, for liberating themselves from kind of the oppressive environments that they are embedded into. And kind of this collective action, this collective self critical reflection will lead to the ability to kind of transform one's society. And so Apraxis the way I see it, the way that I want this to be is a similar kind of move towards a coming together. It's an action, it's self-reflection, it's community based, and it's also towards transforming our environment and transforming our relationships to others and to nature. So there's a huge, strong component of nature-oriented therapies here in a praxis. Again, because the goal is we need to build the bridges to connect with nature more wholly, more through embodiment, um, through recreation, through play. That we see this as a healing component of transcending, as you say, this idea of this separate self that exists. There's so much suffering in our world that exists from just feeling disconnected and separate from our environment, from others. The former Surgeon General, I can't remember his name right now. He even said in the last 2 years that we're in a crisis right now. We're in a loneliness epidemic, and that really rings true in my work as a clinician, and what I see day to day is fundamentally people feel isolated and disconnected from their environments, from nature, from others, and it is causing massive amounts of suffering.
Yeah.
So praxis kind of seeks to be a container so that people can come together, where we can celebrate relationality, where we can learn to connect more deeply with others, with nature, with ourselves, in a way that promotes this liberation of this separate self into a more intrinsic, connected, interrelational kind of matrix of sorts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Kurt, you don't have to sell me, man. Anytime you say liberatory and praxis and community and fighting against societal oppression, you bring out the Rage Against the Machine.
Yes.
And I'm like, and I just, and Freire wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is beautiful, because as you said, and I like how you continue to use the term a bridge, because it shows us that we have to be proactive. We have to build a bridge back to ourselves, our communities, nature, connectivity. We can't just sit by helplessly not doing anything. But I think so many people want that connectivity. They just don't know how or where to start. And there's these different, and you're seeing it, you see it everywhere, where there was that beautiful documentary Happy.
Yeah.
Around the world, cross culturally, and just showed time and time again that the happiest individuals with the most internal peace were those that were embedded in strong communities that took care of one another, that everyone felt seen and heard, as if their voice mattered, they had a role, they contributed to the tribe. And I think I'm so grateful that you are building that with a praxis and trying to bring in these groups of inclusivity and take these adventure treks that you're doing, which aren't just with your unique background in wilderness therapy. You have taken it to a new realm, which is going, how can we do deep work on ourselves? How can we understand eco-integrative models of care and how these impact us? And how can we do it experientially, in real time, in journeys that change us co-collaboratively? Because you're leading them, and you have clinicians that are leading and doing this, but everybody's on the journey together and growing together.
Yeah.
And that's that mutual liberation piece that I think is beautiful and so neat.
Yeah. Beautiful, man. I mean, so that's kind of tapping into something that's really important to me, something that, beyond just the connectedness, is like the experiential aspect of like, how we're actually trying to do this work here at a praxis, how we're trying to, bring these ideas of nature connectedness, ecology of mind, or ecointegrative, and how do we put it into action? Again, praxis, right? How do we put it into action? And so I just want to say, so a praxis, just so we all know here, just so I can communicate this clearly. So a praxis center is one part like a home base for traditional therapy to take place, for individual, family, couples, relational therapy, group therapy. So it's kind of the home base, but then we have these extensions, these arms of a praxis that will kind of connect us to do more experiential types of therapies. One of these is the excursion model that I've created. The excursion is basically taken on this premise of, you'd mentioned earlier with Nemo, that when you were referencing the story of Nemo, that was a hero's journey, right? That Nemo was on. And I've taken the idea of the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell and very much in Jung's work as well, and I've tried to kind of bring this alive in a way that fits kind of modern days and very kind of contextual and modernity here and now. And so the excursions is a blend of cross-cultural experiences, nature immersion, and adventure-based therapy. And this is the eco-integrative model here. I mean, that I set out in my dissertation to kind of lay out. And we have effectively been able to do one excursion so far, and it was a huge deal and was a phenomenal experience. And so last October, we went to Peru for a 10-day excursion, a group of 5 of us. There's 5 men, and journeyed in, from Lima, Peru to Cusco, all around the Sacred Valley to Machu Picchu, where we were learning about the culture of the Quechua people, the Incans, learning about their philosophy, their cosmologies, their spirituality, using that as kind of like a kind of reference point for us as a group in a very collective way to kind of process our own ideas of spirituality and philosophy, and in part by design, where I had our kind of cultural liaison, Henry. Shout out to Henry, he's the man. He was our guide, in country. Was we wanted to kind of get steeped and kind of immerse ourselves in this language and the symbolism, so that as we journeyed through Peru, we would be able to kind of connect with the different landscapes in more deeply, kind of more profound ways, which ultimately is kind of the pinnacle of that was, on arriving to Machu Picchu, which is, for those that haven't been to Machu Picchu, I mean, I highly encourage it. It's one of the most magical, special places you can ever go to, and there is just a magnetism to that place. I mean, you talk about energy, and like there's something palpable that's stemming from that place. It is phenomenal. And so we made that the pinnacle of the trip, of having this immersion and this adventure, and kind of coming together and journeying to Machu Picchu, where we could kind of understand more intimately some of why the Incans why they had built Machu Picchu, and all the different ways in which they constructed it, using certain symbols, way that it's constructed in their cosmology with the stars and constellations, and just this profound experience. And so that journey in itself was kind of and I guess how much do you want to drop in and kind of talk about some of the intricacies of that before I kind of continue on?
Kurt, so I got a hard stop in like 10 minutes.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
I know, because I want to keep going. I got so much I want to ask you, so I'm hoping we can do a part 2
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll do a part two, but let me just
Yes,
say this then,
please.
because I'm like, there's so much to say. I don't know where we drop
And
in
I
here.
have so many questions that are showing up that I want to be like, and I want to ask you this, but we'll go. So I want to take the next 10, wrap this, and then I really am going to make it a series. And
Okay.
we'll just
Okay. That
revisit
sounds
and
good.
dive back in. Yeah,
Let me just add one piece to this
please.
excursion into what's the template for other excursions. So again, this excursion to Peru and further excursions are about the hero's journey. It's about the separation from home, initiation to unknown territory, and then the return. I guess the challenges that you're faced along the way, finding your gold, your treasure, your boon,
Mm,
and having that as part of like the transformative process, and then bringing that gold, that knowledge, that wisdom, that thing that you gain back home to share with your environment, with your community, and so that you're transforming, but then through that action of bringing this home, you're transforming those around you. So that's fundamental to excursions. The other thing I wanted to mention with Peru is with the way that I therapeutically designed this was that it paralleled kind of the journey in Peru paralleled a kind of discussion and a kind of exploration of Jung's work with individuation, so that we were talking about the mapping process of individuation, the path to wholeness, where we're processing ideas of persona and ego. We're looking at our shadow. We're confronting. We're doing exercises where we're confronting our shadow,
beautiful.
and all we're doing this kind of in tandem while we journey, while we're going through the culture, while we're backpacking in the Andes, and we're totally exposed and vulnerable and feeling just kind of at that border beyond order, right, where we're kind of in chaos, where we can allow the shadow to kind of come in. So a lot to kind of discuss in there, maybe for another series, but I really wanted to kind of name that this isn't just about like going on a cool adventure. It's about also doing deep exploratory work and connecting with yourself in new ways, and with others in new ways, and with the land in new ways. And that we
Oh,
transform in that process.
Kurt, it's so beautiful. You make me think about I send out a newsletter, and I was going to put up this one YouTube today of Ram Dass, and it's from one of his lectures, and he says he starts to get really intricate in talking about perception and the lens of perception and our desires and where our mind is focused, and how that can have such a profound impact on how we take in
Mm,
our present reality and where we're at. And so he gives the example of driving through a small town. And he's like, if I'm driving the car through a small town and you're riding shotgun with me, but you're really hungry, your desire is going to focus on anywhere that there's food. So you're going
mm,
to start to look at all the places in that town that have food and the different food. But if I'm not hungry and I hear a noise in my car and my engine's making a funny sound, I'm going to begin to scan the town for all the places that I could get my car repaired and be thinking about my engine and the structure of my engine. Essentially, to say that when we leave the town, you and I experience two completely different towns.
mm,
And what you're
mm,
saying with your excursions is, there's many people who have gone and visited Machu Picchu, or many people that have gone and traveled internationally. But intentionality, embarking on a hero's journey, doing this with a group of others that are taking a similar journey with you, and you are curating this inquisitive, integrative, um, eco, you know, like eco integrative lens. The perceptual lens is, how do we see ourselves? How do we see this land? How do we bring reflexivity into understanding the people that came before us, created this land historically, what it means, what it embodies energetically, and then how do we take that and allow it to envelope over us so that we are not only influenced by it, but literally changed
mm.
it and then take that back to our community. It's beautiful.
Mm, mm. Beautiful, man. I love that idea of the salience and what we put our attention to and what the desiring effect is beyond in that. And you said it, man. You said it very beautifully. I mean, that's really what we're trying to create and curate, is a different way of paying attention to what your needs are, and then to see it in new ways in, you know, in your environment, and really to kind of just lead with that intentionality. I mean, that's wonderful, man.
Absolutely. Kurt, Dr. Youngberg, I absolutely love talking to you. I'd love, yes, if we can pair it up, we'll end here.
Yep.
Uh, and then I want to jump back in, schedule another one, go a little bit deeper,
Oh,
because
let's do it.
I want to get your thoughts on some other stuff, man. I want to talk to you about housing, living with nature, how we our abodes and kind of what we do. And then I want to talk to you a lot about the exponential growth curve of technology
Mhm.
and our relationship with that in tandem with nature,
Mm.
and what it looks like collectively. So
I,
there's
I love that.
so much to explore.
I love that. Let's do it, brother.
Okay,
Um,
listen, have a beautiful July 4th with the family.
yes. You
Thank
too.
you for coming
You
on,
You're
and we'll
most
talk.
welcome. Thank you for having me. It's an honor. Much love, brother. You are the man, and I fully support what you are doing. It's so, uh, it's the same. I mean, it's essentially the same, just with a different focus, with a different salience. And I just really appreciate your mission and what you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Kurt.
Okay, brother.